Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Your Retrospective. In today's installment of the Retrospective, we should be covering episode 85, a sensational puzzle. Also, oddly, it has a second English name, a Sunsational surprise, for some reason. With the Japanese original, it goes by the name Phantom Ultraviolet Rays. This episode was originally released in Japan on June 7th, 2003 as the 85th episode. The English dub, done by the infamous 4Kids, was released on December 18th, 2004, also as the 85th episode. It is notable for being the last episode to air when the programming block known as 4Kids was under the name The Fox Box. Interesting, I'm sure, to archivists, but without further ado of this pre-review stuff, let us dive into the review proper with, starting the story proper. The episode opens with Tiff Tuff and their parents relaxing while sunbathing, comparing it to water baths, which is a bit odd. Her mother then remarks about how when they were younger they loved being on the beach, as her father said those were the days. Tuff laughs at the notion that his parents were ever young. Tiff suggests that they show Kirby their photo album, and she agrees, as we cut to the photo album where we see the first change between versions. In the Japanese original, there's a very ornate set of letters, A, B, M. I have no idea what that alludes to, as Ladylike and Sir Ibram don't have any of those letters in their initials, so it's just kind of weird. 4Kids removed this, replacing it with a very generic-looking heart. Honestly, it's not a big deal, but it's just one of those weird, unneeded, unnecessary changes. We then see various photos of the two parents when they were younger, all dressed up like 1970s hippies. Tiff and the others look on at how humorous it is as we see various pictures. I would like to take note of some of the photos at the beach where we see the second, more substantial recurring change between versions. In the Japanese original, their tans are more, realistic in coloration, while in the English dub, all tans, except for potentially Kirby, have been changed to a reddish orange, making them look more like sunburns than actual tans. This was changed allegedly to avoid racism allegations, which, if true, is stupid because, neither of them really look like a specific race. It's just a tan, people. There's no reason for this to have happened. I guess people were oversensitive even back then. Tiff points out how they look like they're loving the beach. Ladylike says that a tan can make one look healthy, as Sir Ibram agrees. Kirby, however, notices something and points to her face. Tiff notices as well and points to wrinkles. Now, I've looked at this scene multiple times while reviewing this episode and writing the script and such, and I must say I can't see them. That might be the point, but I don't know, maybe one could argue that it's sort of a lazy animation choice. Her mother freaks out, yelling hysterically. She even breaks the fourth wall, something rare in the series, and I can't really think of it happening elsewhere, though I'm probably wrong. And frankly, proves Deadpool is slightly overrated by telling the viewer to stop staring at her. Ironically, her behavior makes people more likely to stare, but anyway, she runs around worried about how the sun is mummifying her into a prune. Her husband asks if she's overreacting, and she says no, and forces her family indoors, before pulling Kirby in as well. After that, we get a shot of the sun, and we cut to the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we see Dedede relaxing as he's fanned by Escargoon. He asks if he looks good, to which Escargoon says he looks like an overcooked turkey. The king says that a tan gives a healthy glow, and Escargoon informs the king about Ladylike's recent behavior. He asks why she is acting like that and why the snail is wearing such a weird hat, which is called a sunbonnet, in case you're curious. Escargoon explains it's to avoid getting sunburned like the king has. He decides to call up the enemy sales guy, who upon seeing the king is horrified, thinking he's some sort of monster. Some have criticized this scene for being an inconsistency due to the enemy sales guy selling monsters. I think that criticism is kind of silly for two reasons. One, just because you have a certain profession doesn't mean you would be immune to all fear associated with that profession. You can work in animal control while being terrified if a full-grown African lion was to show up in your bedroom. Also, it's clearly meant as a joke. Nothing to really overanalyze here. I think you're being a little silly. Dedede explains it's just him, and the enemy sales guy calms down, explaining they didn't recognize him. The king explains he got a suntan. This worries the enemy sales guy and asks him if didn't anyone warn him, like a doctor, that sun rays can be dangerous to one's skin if exposed, and the king asks how the sunlight can be harmful. The enemy sales guy explains how ultraviolet light hurts skin. Dedede and Escargoon are saddened as they thought the sun was fun. The enemy sales guy assures them that the sun can be fun and profitable, as enemy offers several sun protection items and suggests the king can sell them to earn some moolah from the cappies. We cut to outside the castle as we shift to a commercial from channel DDD. Escargoon announces that there's a health alert on the dangers of the sun and shows a picture of the king, which causes the folks to laugh at his disfigurement by the sun. Kawasaki comments on how he's redder than a stoplight as Gengu, the toy store owner, wonders how long he was out there. Dedede somehow answers this by saying 1 hour, and this is how dangerous the sun is and can cause such damage by just an hour of exposure. Bookham's wife is horrified as the police chief remarks that at least Doron, the thief, due to being in jail, won't have to worry as he's, not exposed to the sun. But his wife calls him out for the cruelty. Escargoon explains that this is due to solar rays having ultraviolet light that harms one's skin, which is accompanied by some nice visual usage of Escargoon's face getting grotesquely ugly. The king laughs as the Waddle Dees move the camera, and the king shows off sun lotion that, for some reason, when put upon yourself, removes the sunburn. That's not really how sunscreen works in real life, but hey, maybe it's something like magical. The Japanese original emphasizes this with a close-up of the king's face, which 4Kids for some reason felt the need to remove. Perhaps it was due to time restraints. We don't really know why. Regardless, in both versions, Escargoon announces a set of Escargoon-themed air conditioners, the Escarcool 5000, which is given away for free in addition to other purchases. Ladylike says that she'll get one immediately, but Tiff, however, warns them that it's not a good idea to buy anything from Dedede, especially from television ads, and the king is up to something that they can't trust. Her mother agrees but says going outside is dangerous, and stops to yell at Tuff and Kirby to get back inside. Even Cerebrum tells her to calm down, but when Tuff asks Tiff if she wants to play outside, she screams like a hysterical hyena and says that he's not going outside, and he concedes to her desires. We then see Waddle Dees put up air conditioning in Tiff's house. Ladylike is happy, but Tuff says it's boring. However, his mother screams and says that despite being inside, she still is wrinkly, perhaps even more so than before. They hear Dedede announce that sun rays can enter into a home. Escargoon worries that there's nothing to be done sardonically, which horrifies Ladylike, but then explains to avoid this, one simply has to close the window curtains. Ladylike proceeds to do so. She, however, looks around and sees that the children have left. Tuff says that if his mom wants him to stay inside, she'll have to take him back in, aka leaving the room. Tiff notes that the sun seems more powerful, but her brother dismisses the concern as it being imaginary in her head, and the two wander off. The townsfolk look on in horror at the sun, trying to avoid it. Mabel says she predicts the future is bright. Too bright. She then reacts in shock as she sees the mayor and his wife are severely burned, as is Kawasaki, who passes by delivering food, while Samo, the bartender, greets her and is similarly burned. We see Tuff, the Cappy Kids, and Kirby playing kickball, all very clearly sunburned. Kirby kicks it too hard, which bothers Tuff, but then he points out how sunburned Kirby is, as he then notices that he too is burned. Tiff shows up and she says that Mother was right and says that something is wrong here, looking up at the sun. We then cut back to inside Tuff's family room where he and the others react in shock as her mother says from now on she'll be sleeping during the day while being awake at night. Tiff complains that they will never see her, to which she says that they could go to sleep as well and then they can all be awake at night. Showing that she is a little deranged. We then cut to Cappy Town, where we see the likes of Tuggle, the grocery store owner, the mayor, his wife Curio, and others doing what Lady Like is doing, sleeping during the day. Tiff is woken up by her father in the middle of the night. She is confused, and he explains that her mother is gone. The group search fervently through the castle, only to find her talking to Coo the Owl. Her husband is concerned and asks what she is doing, and Ladylike says that she's just making friends, and Coo greets Cerebrum, leaving him a bit stunned. Tiff and Tuff comment on how crazy their mom is acting, being a little cuckoo, as they say. They go into Capitan only to be shocked to see everyone is awake and about. Tuff says that they must have heard of their mother's plan, to which Tiff says that it makes sense as they already are doing everything else backward. Kawasaki says good morning, but Tiff points out how it's not morning. But the chef says that they can now stay up without guilt and avoid the sun. We cut to Tiff sleeping near the castle moat when her brother wakes her up, saying that she's the only one sleeping in town as the sun begins to rise. Tiff says that switching their routines around won't actually solve the deeper issue, and points out that something is weird. Meta Knight shows up saying that the sun is acting shady. Tiff asks what is going on as the sun seems to be hurting their skin way more than before, as Meta Knight agrees that it is a burning issue. Tiff wonders if the sun is getting stronger, but Meta Knight suggests an alternative, that the planet may be getting weaker as the days starts, and we see a reuse of some footage of Cappies sleeping. We see their air conditioners releasing an odd semi-translucent smoke, and we see Tuff and the others playing kickball. Tuff and the other kids are happy as the adults are sleeping and allowing them to play with no issues and have no homework. We see, however, Dedede and Escargoon are also taking advantage of the lack of adults and speeding like a madman through the town, almost hitting the kids. Tuff is freed from a trash can that fell on his head due to them, as Lololo and Lala inform them that Tiff is asking for them to come as she has an important job for them. They then go to the castle as they were told. We see various Waddle Dees, Professor Kiro, Meta Knight, Sword Knight, Blade Knight, and Tiff working on a massive balloon that, strangely enough, has the inverted color scheme of Tiff's, clothes. No idea why they did that. Tuff asks what's going on as Tiff tells them to stop standing around and help them work on this balloon. Tuff asks what they're doing, and Sword and Blade Knight explain that they are building a balloon to explore the sky to see exactly what is going on up there. The hot air balloon activates as we see Meta Knight, Tiff, Tuff, and Kirby go into it. They are cut free by the Waddle Dees and wave goodbye to the others. Escargoon notices the balloon as the king wonders what it is. When the snail can't answer, they decide to ask Enemy and drive back to the castle. Tuff comments on this as he looks from above and says that they look like bugs, as Tiff counts how high they get as the ground zooms out, and we get a look at some controls as Meta Knight tells them to put their visors on once they reach the proper height. It reveals that there's a hole in the ozone layer, which is a reference to a real-life ozone hole that developed in the late 20th century as the result of certain chemicals being used. The king demands an explanation from the enemy sales guy. The sales guy explains that the hole is a whole lot of trouble via a neat display/graphic that shows the ozone layer. This intrigues Escargoon and Dedede, who says that there's nothing to worry about if it's present. But then the enemy sales guy says that if there was a hole punched in it, it would be a disaster. He then lies to the horrid buffoons that Meta Knight and Kirby are the ones making the hole, clearly trying to turn them against the two, to get them to stop the balloon. We then see a brief shot of Kirby and the others as the enemy sales guy points to the whopper-sized hole. The king asks what can be done, and enemy sales guy says there's nothing that can stop the world turning into a toasted marshmallow, laughing. We then see a large missile-like object drop into Cappy Town, awakening the townsfolk. They all gather around the small crater and see the missile actually contained a note. Police Chief Bookums reads it, and it is revealed to be a message from Meta Knight as Mabel points to the balloon high in the sky that's barely visible. Meta Knight tells them to check their air conditioners, and they do so. Professor Kira opens it up, and it's revealed, as he explains, to be releasing CFC gases, which are in real life chemical, often called chlorofluorocarbons. And while they do indeed cause such ozone depletion, they aren't actually really historically used a lot in air conditioners. Most of it's used for refrigerators, fire suppression systems, propellants, and such things as aerosol cans and solvents. Gus makes the salient observation, alongside Kawasaki, that the great irony is that in their attempts to stay cool, they've only made things hotter. Mabel says that they must throw them all away, but Curio cautions that this must be done safely. Tiff wonders why this was done, and Meta Knight explains it was in order to hurt Kirby, who has very sensitive skin. Tiff remarks that enemy put the whole planet in danger just to get rid of Kirby. Tuff then suggests that Kirby can try to close the hole before it can no longer be fixed. Meta Knight says that if Kirby's up to it, he can possibly fix this, as Kirby, of course, agrees. Tiff calls upon the Warp Star, and Kirby jumps upon it, going to close the hole, but is confronted by the Monster of the Week. Let's talk about him now. His name in the Japanese original is Ozomashi, though he goes unnamed in the English dub. The name Ozomashi comes from the Japanese word for ozone, ozon, and the Japanese word for disgusting, osomashi. Interesting, isn't it? As is the design, which is a serpent-like being with a highly translucent, ethereal, sky-like color that honestly does kind of look like what I would imagine an ozone entity to look like. It's also apparently an allusion to the Japanese kaiju film Dogora that had these giant extraterrestrial entities in the ozone that consumed carbon and were similarly translucent. It has no credited voice actor, as it just uses generic kaiju sounds. Perhaps not the most memorable monster, but I think it's something. It's kind of neat. Resuming with the story, Ozomashi shoots out a UV beam, which Kirby dodges at first, but its tail catches him off guard, and he tries to get back on the Warp Star, but the beast blasts it with the UV light, leaving it hot. It is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Kirby yells at Shui, which basically means hot. 4Kids removed this, and quite frankly, that's a 100% good change, as frankly, the less Kirby speaks, the better. I've always sort of viewed him as a baby, and so when he talks too much, it kind of comes off as weird. Tiff is concerned, as Meta Knight says that the rays are deadly. Tuff and Tiff then get an idea, and they remove the gas tank and toss it to Kirby, who inhales it to become... Jet Kirby, this being his second appearance, last seen in episode 68, Delivery Dilemma, which I've reviewed before, so check that out for a more in-depth description of the ability and how its portrayal in the anime is similar or different. So just to keep it brief and avoid repetition, I think it made the transition to the anime well, though sadly this is the last appearance of it, which, is something at this point we shall be hearing regularly as we reach the end of this amazing anime. Does it go out with a bang, though? Let's just resume the review, and I'll talk about that later. Jet Kirby dodges beams and breaks a hole in the monster's body, but it heals and attacks again. We then cut to Ladylike as she has a statement where we see the final change between versions. In the Japanese original, upon hearing the truth about the ozone hole from Lo La La and the enemy's plot, Sir Ibram says that they are an enemy of all life, and Ladylike says that they're an enemy of women, specifically light-skinned beauties. No comment. Ladylike then orders her husband to declare war. In the English dub, this is altered to her saying that they can't live in the dark anymore, and she orders her husband to demand the king to help Kirby. Sir Ibram hesitates, but she tells him to go tell the king right away. Honestly, both versions are fine. This is one of these changes that I don't really have much of an opinion on, but it's worth mentioning if only for the sake of completeness. In both versions, he then runs looking for the king, but ends up running by them. He tries to get him to help, but seemingly can only listen in horror as Dedede explains that he's going to shoot at Kirby. Tiff remarks that the ray beams are too strong for Jet to deal with, and he ends up bumping into the warp star, spitting out the gas tank, and seemingly Kirby is knocked out. However, the king starts shooting out ammo at Kirby, which gives Tuff an idea and yells at Kirby, who then eats up these cannon shots in order to become... Ah, Bomb Kirby. Unlike Jet Kirby, he's shown up in 4 past episodes. Episode 49, Kirby Takes the Cake. Episode 57, A Half-Baked Battle. Episode 78, Right Hand Robot. And Episode 84, Mummy's Madness, all of which I reviewed before, so check those out for a more in-depth discussion on the transition from the games to the anime. But to keep it brief, I think Bomb made the transition to the anime well. There's just something about the simple bluish Link-like hat that works well in any situation. He tosses a set of bombs, quickly dissipating the ozone monster, and the hole closes. We then cut to later that day as Tiff and her family relax on the beach. Sir Ibram says they can enjoy the sun again as it's back to normal. As Ladylike is happy there is no worry for any future wrinkles, which is not really true. You'll still get wrinkles even from normal non-monster energy. But Tiff breaks the fourth wall, telling the viewers to put sunscreen on when outside, and her brother says not to stay out too long, which, are a bit maybe heavy-handed on the message, but they're good lessons to learn anyway. We hear from Dedede, who says that he's not taking any more chances, as in addition to covering their heads up with the umbrella, they've also decided to bury themselves in the sand to black out UV rays that get through the ozone layer. The two laugh, but then Tuff and Kirby bury their heads in the sand as punishment for their actions, and the episode ends with them laughing at their little prank. Now that we're done with that, let us discuss the positives, negatives, and my final thoughts on this episode as a whole. Starting with the positives, we've got to talk about that theme, which is, nice of this episode. Once again, it's something related to environmentalism, and while some would consider this a negative, a simple retread, but I disagree. While yes, there have been many environmentally themed episodes, this one, like all the others, manages to stand out by focusing on another specific sub-theme / environmental problem, ozone depletion, which is done by chemicals like CFCs, HCFCs, and halons. Unlike whaling, which has been the subject of a past episode, this is still a big problem, though luckily, even by the time this episode aired in the early 2000s, they had already been banned, so the hole around the Antarctic has greatly been healing and should be back to normal sometime by the mid-2040s. So, it's a problem, luckily, that we have addressed to some extent. Other positives include how the whole town's reaction were quite humorous, with Ladylike's, reactions being particularly absurd, aided by the use of fourth wall breaking humor, which, take note, hipsters, works because it is specifically rare in the series. If it was constant, it would have lost its charm and gotten a little annoying, but because it only happens a few times, means that it's still, good. The monster Ozomashi was solid, if not my personal favorite. I do think it would be neat if it showed up in the video game series. Perhaps it could work like a shooter stage, like, the Nova or Kabula fights. Tiff and Dedede's roles here are both really engaging, and I kind of like how Enemy Sales Guy takes a more active role here. And it's funny because he ends up being the one who shoots himself in the foot, not Dedede, as Dedede wasn't even really in on the scheme. As we reach the copy abilities, however, we're going to have to start talking about the negatives. While yes, having to use 2 copy abilities in one episode to defeat a monster is unique and in other contexts would have, I think, been really cool, unfortunately, I think it comes at the cost of giving Jet a really weak send-off. I think it would have been better if they swapped the order around, having Bomb fail and then Jet finishing the monster off. Gotta say, I really did appreciate that they gave the Kirby transitions a tan. So that's not all bad, but still, while one could argue that this isn't necessarily criticism of the episode itself, but rather the series as a whole, I still think the fact that this is the final appearance of the, Jet Kirby copy ability probably should have been the one that defeated the monster just to give it a send off, but I guess it's alright. It's just nice to see Jet again, though. Far stronger, I think, was outside of, Jet Kirby's usage, the alteration of the heart and the tan color change. Those are not that big of a deal, but if I had to give any, in my opinion, strong criticisms, those would be some of the ones I would personally give through. Some other complaints I've seen people make is how the enemy sales guy was out of character and that the fourth wall breaks are bad. Personally, I disagree with both of those. I think the enemy sales guy fear was a good joke and not something you need to look into too much, and the fourth wall breaks are fine in moderation. I know a lot of modern stories often have too many and that can get a little obnoxious, but luckily the series manages to avoid it outside of this episode being a noteworthy exception, so it's not that big of a deal. Overall, this is a pretty great episode that I think is a must watch, or at the very least one you don't really want to skip for anyone who's binging the series. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master, and if you liked the video, you liked it, but if you loved it, consider subscribing and sharing around. It really does help smaller YouTubers out a lot more than people realize, and, join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective, and have a wonderful day.